Welcome to the Mondoweiss podcast. I'm your host, Dave Reed. At Mondoweiss, we cover the movements, activists, and policymakers who affect the struggle for freedom in Palestine. In October 2021, the Israeli government designated 6 Palestinian civil society organizations terrorist institutions, claiming the groups had ties and were channeling money to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The PFLP is a secular Marxist-Leninist and revolutionary socialist organization founded in 1967, and like several other Palestinian political factions, it is considered by Israel to be a terrorist organization. The Israeli designation aimed to criminalize the work of the 6 organizations and cut their international funding. It sparked widespread condemnation from human rights groups across the globe. Recently, our Palestine News Director Yumna Patel sat down with Sahar Francis, the General Director of the Ramallah-based group Addameer, one of the civil society groups targeted by the Israeli government. Addameer provides legal and advocacy support to Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli and Palestinian prisons. Sahar is an attorney by training and joined Addameer in 1998, first as a human rights lawyer, then as head of the legal unit. She warns that if this move by the Israeli government goes unchallenged, the effort to undermine Palestinian civil society organizations won't end with these 6 groups.
And just tell us a little bit about Addameer and the work that you all do.
I'm Sahar Francis, a lawyer and the director of Addameer. I joined Addameer back in 1998 and became the director in 2006. Addameer was established in late 1991 to offer legal aid for Palestinian political prisoners under the Israeli occupation in the military court system and the civil system. After the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, we also offer the same services, more or less, for political prisoners arrested by the Palestinian Authority. We also do visitation to the detention facilities and prisons to monitor and document the violations, mostly torture, ill treatment, and actually based on our legal work and the documentation, we issue studies, reports, and do our advocacy on the local level and the international level. And we have training and awareness program for the community, for students, for children, and those who would be subjected for imprisonment, how to face the procedures and what it means to be imprisoned under the military system.
So, from what we understand, Addameer is one of the only, if not the only, organizations of its kind that does this sort of extensive work with Palestinian prisoners. So can you tell us about sort of why the work of the organization is so unique and important and the impact that it has on the community?
Actually, Addameer were established in the same period with Defense for Children International, that they started to offer the same program more or less for child detainees at that time. And we were the first 2 Palestinian organizations actually to do pro bono work for the Palestinian political prisoners. Currently, we can say there's other colleagues like the Prisoners Club, the Ministry of Prisoners that became the High Commission for Prisoners Affairs and Ex-Prisoners, and other organizations that they offer more or less the same services. But still the work of Addameer with the DCI, the uniqueness that our advocacy on the international level, especially with the UN system, we're almost the only 2 organizations on the Palestinian context that systematically we submit complaints and reports to the UN mechanisms, like the special mechanisms, whether under the treaty, the anti-torture treaty, or the Child Rights Convention and other mechanisms. And we have a very wide network on the international level as well, especially Addameer, because all these years we were developing also our advocacy and campaigning with the movements and groups that works for political prisoners in other contexts. For example, in the United States, in Latin America, in Spain, in Turkey, in Ireland, In other conflicts, South Africa, where they had the experience of the political prisoners within the conflict. So this is why I would say that the importance of the work of Addameer is significant, and it's also related to the fact why we are under attack. And the attack didn't start just by the designation. The designation was maybe the last step that the Israeli authorities took against Addameer and other NGOs. The campaign against us is for long years: harassment, smear campaign, defamation, distributing false information by different groups like NGO Monitor, UK Lawyers for Israel, and all these right-wing Israeli groups that they were trying to affect our work by affecting our reputation and attacking our donors mainly, hoping that the donors would be terrified and they will cut the funds, and by this they can affect our daily work. Since all this campaign didn't work before, so they ended up with the designation using the Israeli law and the military orders.
Right. So, I mean, as you mentioned, it's important to contextualize that this recent decision to designate Addameer and the other organizations as terrorist organizations didn't come out of the blue. It's come after a very long time of, like you said, a concerted effort to sort of attack the organization and the work that you do.
Of course, because we should put it in the context that the occupation will do everything available as a tool to oppress the Palestinian people. And we should remember that in the past, they also closed and shut down civil society organizations, especially in East Jerusalem, for example, because they didn't wanted any presence of any Palestinian civil society in the city in order to support the residents there. And the Orient House, one of the main organizations that was led by the Palestinian Authority, they also closed it in order to send a clear message to the PA that you cannot act in East Jerusalem as an authority. You don't have jurisdiction. This is totally violates the international law. Israel enforcing the annexation on East Jerusalem by these tools. And it continues. And when the time came to attack Palestinian human rights organizations and development organizations, especially now in the political context where they are on the ground, actually they are implementing the deal of the century. So organizations like the agriculture work committees that deals with land construction and supporting farmers, especially in areas where Israel is looking to confiscate and to annex to the Israeli side, the Jordanian Valley, Area C, and all these sensitive places. Of course, the organization would be attacked. Those who work with the ICC, the International Criminal Court, like Al-Haq, and submitting, and the DCI and the Addameer, of course, and insisting on the accountability question that we have to use every tool offered by the international law in the UN level and in other platforms in order to guarantee accountability. We would be attacked for this work. All those who are involved with the PDS, with the campaign to divest and enforce sanctions, would be attacked. So it's not going to be just these 6 organizations. And this is why it's very important, the campaign that we are leading, to be supported and to really force the states not to act according to this decision. Because if Israel will succeed in this step, I think it would be just another round of restrictions and attack against a wide range of other organizations in the Palestinian civil society.
Mm-hmm. So you don't think that this, designation of these 6 organizations is necessarily a one and done kind of thing for these?
No, definitely. Also, I should highlight the case of the World Vision. big organization that worked so many years for humanitarian aid, especially in Gaza area. The same story. They arrested the director of the organization, claiming that he was channeling money to Hamas, and he's awaiting trial for 5 years now in the Israeli court. And they were not able to prove, not yet. I don't know how the court will end, but this shows the absurd as well in the legal procedures that a Palestinian can face, even in front of the civil system inside Israel, not mentioning the difficulties in front of the military system, because he's prosecuted in the Be'er Sheva district court. And in the same time, at the beginning, the Australian government, the World Vision, implemented a very comprehensive audit for this claim, and they confirmed that there's no one proof that Muhammad was channeling money to Hamas. So why the person is still in the Israeli prison? I mean, the policy behind all these attacks is actually to terrify the donors, to terrify those that they were investing a lot in the civil society in Palestine by different projects, whether humanitarian or legal or development, cultural, educational, health, all these sectors. The message for the international community that supports the Palestinian people, that don't dare to come and implement your projects here. And this explains why they used actually the Israeli civil law, why they designated us first according to the Israeli anti-terror law of 2016. Legally speaking, this is an Israeli law that shouldn't be implemented on the occupied territories first and most. This is a violation by itself to the international law, international humanitarian law. But I believe they did so in order to terrify and affect our donors and the international organizations or groups that work with us, because this would be used mostly against them. Against us, it was enough to use the military order that is applicable in the occupied territories. But again, the military order wouldn't give the power for the Israeli authority to run after all these international entities that they are working in the occupied territories.
I mean, as you mentioned, that's been a big question, right, in the aftermath of this whole thing and the designation of the organizations, is the question of funding, right? And how this designation of labeling Addameer as a terrorist organization, for example, how it's going to impact not only your international funding, but also, international relationships and partnerships with other organizations that have supported you in the past.
The aim actually is to make all these organizations and groups and friends to be afraid of continuing their relation with Addameer and the other organizations, and slowly to cut these relations, also, or to be forced to cut these relations. Let's assume even if Israel don't implement the order from the point of physically raiding the offices and confiscate the properties and shut down the offices and freeze our accounts. All these measures could be taken any moment, but let's assume if they don't do and just keep the order, I think that by the time the banks would be afraid from dealing with our transactions and financial actions, because there was cases against Palestinian banks in the United States initiated by the Israeli groups under the regulations of anti-terror and money laundering regulations. And I think they hope that they can do the same in the future with these 6 organizations.
Something that you mentioned before, specifically in the case of the World Vision case, was a lack of proof. And that has something that has been brought up time and time again in regards to the designation of these 6 organizations as terror groups, is the lack of proof when it comes to the Israeli accusations against your organizations. Can you tell us a little bit more, give us some more insight into the accusations and Israel's sort of failure up until this point to back up those accusations?
Actually, the problem in the Israeli system, whether the military system or the civil court system, is the use of secret evidences, secret dossier that would be presented for the court. And in Israel, the emergency situation is still continuing since 1948, since the establishment of the state. They never canceled the emergency situation that controls everything in our life, especially on the legal level. When the courts do the balance between the security needs and any other public interest, they will favor the security needs, of course. And this is the main problem in our case and in other cases of administrative detention, house demolitions, holding bodies of martyrs or prisoners, eviction of families from their houses, land confiscation. In almost any case that we bring in front of the Israeli courts, they can use the secret information as justification. Family unifications would be denied based on secret information that would be submitted to the court. And this explains as well, in our case, they tried to do it even before the designation. Back in May 2021, they claimed that they had information from interrogation. And we know what was this information. These are the employees of the healthcare committees who were imprisoned in March, April, and May 2021. And some of them, they were claiming in their statements to the police that all these 7 organizations, the healthcare committees and us, the 6 others, are belonging to the PFLP. But no one asked them, why you claim such a claim? What's the resource of your information? You, as an employee in the healthcare committee, how you can tell about Addameer, about Al-Haq, about all the other 6 organizations that they are belonging, and what it means, an organization. We're registered under the Palestinian Authority Interior Ministry. According to the Palestinian law, any NGO should be independent, apolitical, and we cannot be it's illegal according to the Palestinian law to be affiliated with any political party, not mentioning channeling money to any political party. So how you can claim that these organizations, are you involved in the financial management of these organizations? No, of course. So this is why when they drafted the report, the secret dossier that they presented, the foreign ministry, the Israeli foreign ministry presented it back in July, if not more, to the European countries, especially the EU, as a main funder for most of the civil society in the Palestinian context. They rejected it. They told them this is not enough. This information cannot be a base for such a decision. So I think this is what caused the Israelis to choose to designate us, because according to their law, they can use the secret information. And again, according to their law, the aim is to terrify the donors, because it didn't work the way around like the previous tools that they used. And now they claim that they have secret information. I think, again, they're playing the same game with these claims that they have secret information, because from our experience as lawyers working with the system for 30 years almost, it could be most probably that the secret information is about ex-prisoners that we represented or were working in Addameer in previous years, or board members or employees that they were, again, convicted by the same system that we are claiming it's not a fair system. How come you can rely on the outcomes of a judicial process that wasn't fair, that wasn't due process according to the international standards? Can you take these decisions as accurate and base your decisions based on them in the international level? I don't think the military court cases can stand in any examination of a fair trial in any democratic system. So how come you can base your decisions on such way of combining and drafting reports and secret reports or even clear evidences? It's also worth mentioning that all these employees of the healthcare committees are still under trial in the military court. This is very important. The military court didn't said a final word about these confessions and statements that they are trying to use against us. Let the court discuss these statements, whether they are accurate, not accurate. Can we rely on them? Are the people telling the truth or not? This is basic in any criminal procedures. How come you can start use these statements before a final decision from the court related to these statements?
Yeah, it's important. I mean, it's easy, right, for the Israeli government to perhaps say, as you mentioned, that employees of Addameer or board members or people that they have, ex-prisoners that they have represented, were tried and convicted in Israeli military courts, thus for giving us, this reason to designate the organization as a terrorist group. But many people and, outside of Palestine actually don't realize the way that the Israeli military courts work and just how much of Palestinian society has actually been imprisoned by the government.
More than 40% of Palestinian population were imprisoned and accused and convicted in these military courts because the system actually is based on a plea bargain. Most of the people would be convicted based on a plea bargain because it's the easiest way to guarantee the shortest sentence that you can guarantee in this system. And there is a serious problem in the definition of the crimes. People outside Palestine should understand that almost every action that would be considered as under the cover of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of education, freedom of movement, would be considered a crime in Palestine. If you dare to enter to an area that they claim that this is a closed military area, this is a crime that you would be convicted in this military court and accused to be a terrorist. This would be a security crime. When you sentence someone based on these security allegations, he would be considered for the system as a terrorist person. A child that throws stones, he would be convicted and considered to be a terrorist for the system. A student active in any Palestinian university, because all of the student movements are considered terrorist groups like Addameer and Al-Haq and all the other organizations. And any student active in this studential movement, he would be imprisoned for illegal and terrorist activities. So, it's very easy. The system was built anyway to criminalize the whole society. And they're doing this. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were imprisoned. Currently, there's 5,000 prisoners in the Israeli prison. So how come you would trust such a system that it's really taking the most serious cases that affects directly their security and base your decisions on that. Any Palestinian could be a threat to the security. The administrative detention policy that you imprison hundreds of people based on secret information and you claim they are terrorists without even enabling them to defend themselves properly in this system. So, I mean, the world should understand the problematic of the justice system in Israel. You cannot rely on the justice system in Israel when it comes for the treatment to the Palestinians and the Palestinian people.
I want to ask you a little bit about what the international response to the designation of the 6 organizations has been like, particularly the lackluster response from the U.S. and the Biden administration, and up until now, the failure to really take a stand against this decision and reprimand Israel for declaring 6 civil society organizations as terror groups, up until now with no real proof or evidence.
Exactly. I think this silence is very bad and very dangerous. Not just against the Palestinian civil society, I think against the human rights movement in the world, not just in Palestine, because if you review the position of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, she was very clear, saying that Israel manipulated the use of the anti-terror laws according to the international law, and the designation of the 6 organizations is a violation, is a clear violation to all these treaties to guarantee the freedom of speech and the human rights in the international context. And the silence of the states, like especially the United States, because we believe they have a very important role in this issue. If the United States is not going to take a very clear position in rejecting this decision, would be a kind of a silent message to the banking system, at least, that you can do whatever you want. You can freeze their accounts. We don't care. It's not our business. No, I mean, in order to protect the human rights sector in Palestine, because now, as I said, it will start with us, but it's not going to be just us. It's going to affect the whole Palestinian human rights and civil society. Is the United States interested exactly in dismantling and affecting and demolishing the whole Palestinian civil society system? If yes, so I think the silence would be the answer. But this is why it's very important that they take position as well, the European countries, especially those that they were funding the civil society in Palestine, because their agreement or silent acceptance for the Israeli designation would mean that they themselves were corrupted and not doing their duty in the audit and the management that we were subjected to all these years. Can you imagine, like, we are getting funds from different entities for the last 40 years? Does it mean that all these groups were not aware that we were able to cheat and channel money to any political party? This is like, if you really take a stand in supporting the Israeli designation, it means all these audit firms, all these partners, all these countries, all the procedures of how to manage your projects around the world is not correct, is not working.
Mm-hmm. What would you like to see from the United States and from the international community?
More protection. I think the United States has the role to say to Israel, enough is enough, because I think the fact that there's no limit for the support from the political decision-making level on the United States to the Israeli government and gives the green light for all these violations and practices, settlements and all the other grave violations that takes place on the daily level. And I think if you are really supported to the Palestinian right of self-determination, to the right of the Palestinian people to have their own state, you cannot continue with these practices, because how you can see that Israel is really looking for peace and for like accepting the fact that the Palestinians have the right of self-determination. And this is why it's because we should put it in the whole context. Actually, although the Biden administration are not continuing with the century of the plan, peace plan of Trump, but what's going on the ground, we see it on our eyes on the daily level, Israel, because no one is stopping them. They're implementing this plan. And our side, like the fact that they are trying to silence us is totally as well connected to this fact that they don't want anyone to say no to their plan and to be able to document their violations and submit this information to the International Criminal Court so they could be found accountable for the war crimes they are committing on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. I want to finish off by asking maybe a more personal question about you and the staff and sort of what the climate has been like here in the office at Addameer over the past couple months since the designation was made. I can imagine that it's been stressful, scary, as you mentioned, with the military order. Now Israel has given the green light for the military. At any moment, they could come, seize all your assets, close down the organization, raid your office, arrest your staff members. We also found out after the designation was made that Addameer and some of its staff members were the target of a spyware hack as well from the Israeli NSO company. So what has the climate been like here over the past few weeks?
Very stressful, very scary, because all what you mentioned can happen to anyone, like arrests. The surveillance was very worrying, very, very intimidating. Out of a sudden, you would discover that your whole life, your personal life was open for someone that could listen, hear, manage even your daily life communications with your family, with your friends. It's horrible, and it really affected the spirit of the people. But at the same time, we don't have any other choice but to keep going, to continue, because we realize that this is the aim, that they are doing all this in order to shut us down and to silence us, and in order to bring us to the point where we will say, okay, it doesn't worth. No, it worth. I think not just the case of the prisoners, our self-determination as a people, our struggle for justice and dignity is worth the price, the high price that we can pay as individuals. At the end of the day, we are not alone. And this is also encouraging, and the support from the international level, the friends around the world, the huge support that we received from organizations, grassroots, everyone is also giving hope that one day justice will really come. It can't be that the occupation will last forever. No, it will be ending.
Sahar, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our show, a production of mondoweiss.net. The music is from Sound of Picture. Visit our site to sign up for free daily and weekly newsletters on Palestine, Israel, and related U.S. politics. If you're enjoying our podcast, please consider becoming a donor by visiting mondoweiss.net/donate. Mondoweiss is a nonprofit publication, and every donation of any amount helps sustain our work. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave a rating and review to help other listeners find our show.